O'Neal. Oh my God! Turned inside out by Orton.
10 of the worst WWE announce table botches. Number 10, the table collapses on Montes Ford. Now, the announce tables in WWE can be very unpredictable, especially when wrestlers are using them to walk across. Montes Ford would take on Roman Reigns in 2021 on an episode of SmackDown, and this acted as the biggest match of Ford's career to date. Ford's performance received positive reviews from fans, especially because he was able to quickly recover from an announce table botch. During the action on the outside of the ring, Ford would walk across the announce table to get to Reigns, yet the table completely collapsed. Ford was perfectly fine and sold this with shock and awe, as he was evidently baffled as to how this even happened. Ford was able to quickly recover and the match continued without any hiccups. It's unknown if there was supposed to be a scripted spot in which either Ford or Reigns would have been put through the table, as there was some speculation that the table was built to break, which would explain why Ford easily went through it. Number 9. The power of editing. Now, SmackDown for the longest time was a pre-taped product, and this always allowed WWE to edit out any unwanted botches and blunders. In 2002, during a match between Kurt Angle and Kane, as Kane was removing the monitors from the announce table, the table imploded. Now, due to SmackDown being taped, WWE would film a subsequent segment which would see Angle put Kane through the announce table, and the WWE would simply edit out the two segments together, so it looks like there was no actual botch. WWE did a masterful job in handling this, and it must have been insanely awkward for this live crowd to realize that WWE were retaping a spot because it was botched. Number 8. Randy Orton's foot gets caught. The two legends of WWE collided in a street fight on SmackDown in 2011, and it was a miracle that none of the participants walked out with a legitimate injury. The match was between Kane and Randy Orton, and a key spot in the match saw Orton counter a chokeslam attempt by leaping onto the announce table. The spot looked fantastic, but that was until Orton's foot got caught in the table and the table fell over. There was immediate concern for Orton's welfare as he would grab his leg and he looked to be in immense pain. Orton tried to no-sell the pain, but it was obvious that he couldn't hide how much pain he was actually in, and the referee looked incredibly concerned that one of WWE's top guys had just been seriously hurt. Number 7. The table fails to break. The 2007 New Year's Revolution pay-per-view is mostly known for Triple H tearing his quad, but it also featured a huge announce table botch that could have led to another major injury. A spot in the match saw Triple H execute a trademark pedigree onto Edge onto the announce table. The aim was for the table to completely break, and this would have meant that Edge and the game could land safely. However, the table failed to break, and this meant that Edge had a truly horrific landing. Jim Ross, as he always did, managed to cover up the botch well, yet there was no way that Edge wasn't feeling the effects of the botch. Number 6. Toni Storm gets lost. When a table is gimmicked to break, it's vital that the table breaks at the correct time, or this can mess up the pacing of the match. At the 2021 Vengeance Day event, Toni Storm was clearing the table during a match, and in doing so, she must have put a little too much force into it, as the table just exploded. It was incredibly awkward, and Storm stood there for a few seconds as she tried to determine how to recover and move on to the next planned spot. Number 5. Shawn Michaels' rough landing. WrestleMania 24 acted as Ric Flair's final ever WWE match. To mark the occasion, Flair would be paired with one of the greatest of all time in Shawn Michaels, and the two had a certified classic that sent Flair out in style. The match was booked to perfection, yet just minutes into the match, there was a serious announce table botch that almost derailed the match completely. Michaels would perform a beautiful springboard moonsault onto Flair, however Flair ducked and Michaels went crashing through the table. The idea of the spot was that the table would cushion HBK's fall and he would be able to have a safe landing. Unfortunately, this wasn't the case, as HBK landed ribs first onto the edge of the table, and the table just awkwardly fell over. HBK was struggling to breathe, and there was concern that Mr. WrestleMania may have legitimately broken his ribs. This was later confirmed to be the case, as HBK had legit injured his ribs, and he was somehow able to continue the match without anyone knowing he was genuinely hurt. Number 4. Mr. McMahon's fall from grace. Sometimes the announce table can play its part in a spot, however the wrestler who is going to take a bump through the announce table can make a huge mistake when it comes to their landing. This was the case with Vince McMahon, as in 1999 at the St. Valentine's Day Massacre pay-per-view, he took a bump from the steel cage onto the announce table, and McMahon took the bump in such a bad way that he walked away with an injury. Former head writer for WWE Vince Russo discussed the infamous botch on the Wrestling Outlaws, and this is what he had to say. The great Richie Posner. I have a whole chapter of him in my book. For Brian, aka Road Dogg, it was Vince's first bump he ever took off the cage. Do you remember this? I think it was at St. Valentine's Day Massacre or something like that. Whatever, but Vince actually took a bump off the cage and landed on his ass and landed wrong. He took the bump wrong. So Brian, after the match, everybody leaves, we're out by the cage, and he calls Richie over, and he's like, Richie, we talked about this, and you were supposed to have this set up. And Richie just sits there and says, no Vince, it was set up perfectly. You missed it, Vince. You missed it, Vince. According to Russo, McMahon's entire backside was black and blue, and in typical McMahon fashion, he outright refused to go to a doctor for treatment. Number 3, The Rock's bad luck. Now, The Rock had 2 back-to-back pay-per-view matches against CM Punk in early 2013, and both pay-per-view matches featured a blunder with the announce table. The first botch took place at the Royal Rumble event, as when The Rock went to rock bottom Punk through the table just instantly collapsed. The Great One was quick to check on Punk, and both men were perfectly okay. The following month at the Elimination Chamber show, Punk would this time attempt to rock bottom the reigning WWE Champion. However, upon landing, The Rock didn't go through the table and instead slid down onto the floor like he was on a slide. It's possible that due to the botch at the Royal Rumble pay-per-view, WWE reinforced the table, however they look like they reinforced it far too much. Number 2, CM Punk's WrestleMania moment. CM Punk and The Undertaker had the match of a lifetime at WrestleMania 29, and the two just didn't have a match of the night, they also had fans who were claiming that the match deserved to be in a prestigious main event position. The match wasn't without its botches, however, as when Punk went to perform a diving top rope elbow onto the dead man who was lying prone on the announce table, the table didn't play ball and it failed to break. The reason it didn't break was because Punk wasn't able to get enough momentum, and this meant that he landed side first into the edge of the table. This would have resulted in truly horrific pain for Punk, and the WWE commentary team thankfully dissected the spot and drew attention to how Punk would have been in as much pain as The Undertaker. And number 1, the main event goes wrong. Now thankfully, over the past 15 years, WWE have drastically altered their policy relating to head injuries and CTE. The former policy was on full display in the main event of the 2000 SummerSlam, and it makes for harrowing viewing. SummerSlam 2000 was main evented by a WWE title match between The Rock, Kurt Angle, and Triple H. A spot in the match saw Triple H perform a pedigree onto Angle through the announce table. The problem here is that when the table gave way, Angle's head hit the concrete very hard. Angle was knocked senseless, and despite WWE delivering a scripted spot where Angle would head to the backstage area, he managed to come back and finish the match despite not having a clue what was happening. If this botch would have happened today, then Angle's involvement in the Triple Threat Showdown would have come to an immediate end. Triple H reflected on the botched announce table spot during an appearance on Impulsive, and the head of WWE Creative was thankfully honest regarding how poorly the match is aged. Now this is where the story gets terrible, because now we know about concussions and everything else. None of this should have ever happened, but we didn't know this at the time. But you know, Kurt goes into the back, Rock and I are just working now. At some point we're getting feedback from the back through the referee, and finally it was Earl Hebner. I just tell Earl, do not tell me one thing, with a lot of expletives here that they say from the back. I don't give a shit. I need one thing, tell me if he's coming back, if he knows where he is. That's all I need to know, and tell me when. We'll just keep going until somebody tells me he can come out or he ain't coming out. I'll figure out a finish. Now according to Angle, his performance was so courageous that it heavily influenced WWE to put the title on him just 2 months later. But there you have it folks, 10 of the worst WWE announce table botches and fails. Be sure to leave your comments down below, and I'll see you next time with some more wrestling content.